So I was studying illegal drug markets, yes, and what I noticed going to different countries and interviewing specialists, that many specialists said, "Well, yes, of course, the war on drugs. Of course, it's not really working." And
another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted and privileged to have a conversation with Tim Boekhout from Solinge. Tim, welcome to the show.
Welcome. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and allow me to introduce who Tim is. He's an independent criminologist. Initially started off with the global drugs prohibition, which is now his second specialty, because his current specialty is saving the indigenous forest protection, and specifically of the Brazilian Amazon. So he specialized in forest crime and also is one of the founders of Forest Forces. So again, Tim, welcome. Now, before I would like to go to the main topic of forest crime, you did tell me that you once wrote a public letter to Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General of the UN at the time. Why did you do that? What was that about?
Yeah, this was in 1998. I was not the only person writing this letter. It was really a group of people, but it was originally my idea to write this letter. Why? I was at the time, I was a specialist in drug trafficking and drugs policy. I'm talking about illegal drugs, heroin, cocaine, etc. So I was studying illegal drug markets, yes, and what I noticed going to different countries and interviewing specialists, that many specialists said, "Well, yes, of course, the war on drugs. Of course, it's not really working." But okay, so I noticed that people from the medical world, law enforcement, scientists, and many specialists, they thought, yeah, of course, it's not going to work as a global drug prohibition. I thought, wow, it's fascinating that a lot of people are saying this, and it's creating a lot of crime. And we know that alcohol was illegal during 11 years in the United States, from 1920 until 1933, or 13 years, excuse me. And this gave a huge impetus to organized crime. And now we have the same situation with substances that have become illegal during the 20th century. And it has created a huge illegal industry. And I thought, so a lot of people are very critical about this, that there should be other ways. And I thought, okay, we should organize this. So many people think this. And so I got this idea of we should write an open letter to Kofi Annan. And then in 1998 was the World Drug Summit. And then some people from New York asked me, "Hey, Tim, any ideas for the World Drug Summit?" And I thought, well, I think we should write an open letter to Kofi Annan, because so many specialists think it should be different. And so the central phrase of this letter was, we believe that the harms caused by drug policy and the war on drugs, all this criminalization, it's causing more harm than drug abuse itself. In other words, the remedy is worse than disease, and so a lot of people think that. And so that was my first really big international initiative, you can say.
Yeah, well done. And which actually raises with me the question, that big idea, is that also what inspired you then to also look at forest crime? And let's explore that. We know tropical trees are being cut down. So in the first place, why are they being cut down? Is that for the wood itself or the land that's occupied? Why are we doing this?
We're doing it both. You have to distinguish maybe a little bit the tropical forests and the more temperate forests. For example, in Russia or in Canada, when there is deforestation, it's really for the wood, for the timber, and it's clear cutting. In tropical rainforest is different, because in tropical rainforest, it's on one hand for the timber, the logs, the wood, but it's selective, and so that does not immediately lead to deforestation. But like in the Amazon rainforest, the deforestation is really for agriculture, large scale agriculture, mainly cattle. And soy, and then soy is cattle feed. So you can really say in the Amazon, the deforestation is driven by the meat industry, really, because it's beef, cows, and animal feed, mainly for China and Europe. And so it's really agriculture that's driving deforestation. Although in general, the causes are timber, agriculture, and mining. Mining is approximately 10%.
Only 10%. Okay.
10%, yes. And agriculture is really 70% in the Amazon. 80% is cattle.
Okay, but I can understand that society would state, some parts of society would state that, okay, taking down a tropical forest for cattle, for soybeans, some might see that and feel that as criminal behavior. But what's the link between that and true criminal behavior?
Well, it is actually criminal behavior, because about 80% of the deforestation in the Amazon is illegal. And it's something that's very underestimated globally, if you pay attention to it. I mean, there's a lot of articles on deforestation in the Amazon in Brazil. And the Amazon is several countries, but the most 2/3 of the complete Amazon is within the borders of Brazil. And it's also in Brazil where you see a disproportionately large part of all this deforestation. And in Brazil, there's no doubt about it. Almost all of it is illegal. It's public land that's being deforested illegally, and it's being occupied by usually cattle farmers or large landholders. We're not talking about small farms. I mean, there are some small farms occupying public land, but the big chunks, the big part is really large landowners. I mean, pretty rich farmers, and it's also with speculation, but most of it is illegal. And so even if whatever you think of it, personal opinions, it is just by law, it is illegal, most of it.
Okay, yeah, and by which standards, by which laws? Is the Brazilian law stating it's illegal?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's really stealing of public lands.
Yeah. Okay, so you would be caught off guard if all of a sudden Brazil would make it legal to chop wood as much as possible.
Well, this has been happening, actually. This is the trend, because it's since the 80s. Most of it has always been illegal, but the policy tendency over the last few decades is that it's later legalized or amnesty, so that all these people aren't punished. And that's why we have this dynamic that people are doing it still illegally today, expecting that the government will later legalize it or approve it or give an amnesty.
Okay, now what's your personal motivation? The fact that it's illegal, or the fact that we're chopping down a rainforest? What's driving you personally?
Well, for me, it's actually both. It started with really a worry, because since I visited tropical rainforests, and I'm a nature lover and forests, but we have forests in the Netherlands where I like to walk, and I have a food garden and insect garden where I have a lot of pleasure in taking care of this garden. But then if you walk in a tropical rainforest with so much more diversity. So I fell in love kind of with tropical rainforest, this concentration of live plants and animals and just some bizarre, forms. And so this is my, love, you can say, for this life. And so that's how it started. And then a worry, why? Oh, wow, we're destroying this. Why are we doing this? But it's actually later on, when I was already teaching criminology at the university at the time, Utrecht University at the time. And I thought, okay, I wanted to do it. But then I discovered, well, it is most of it is actually illegal. In many parts, it's illegal. And also the tropical timber, in many countries, most of the logging is illegal. And I was a drugs expert 20 years ago. And I still am a little bit, but it was my, and I thought, okay, but I knew I wanted to change to environmental crime, environmental issues, because I thought it's really more important. We have this beautiful planet, and we're destroying it. And then I said, well, part of this destruction is simply illegal. So I thought, okay, I'm a lecturer in criminology. I can approach this destruction from a criminological perspective. So this is what 20 years ago I was reflecting, and then more and more I read about it. It's, it is actually just crime, just and so that's what made it for me easier actually to go to specialize in this area.
Excellent. And how many colleagues do you have worldwide? I mean, you call yourself now a criminologist specialized in forest crime. How many of you are out there? Are you the only voice out there, or there's
I'm about the only voice. I still, I mean, not more, just a handful of people. To my surprise, really. There's, of course, there's NGOs very active with deforestation, but taking the angle of illegality and crime, that's quite rare. So maybe there's just really a handful of people doing this, really, yeah. And I have a colleague in Vietnam, for example, who wrote his PhD about this. And but academic specialists, there are not many. No, just a few, a handful.
Now, you once made a statement with forest crime. It's not about the small things going wrong. It's actually organized crime. You more or less alluded to that in a couple of previous statements you've made. But can you expand on that? Who is organizing this?
Yes. Well, for organized crime, what is organized crime? For a criminologist, what distinguishes organized crime from, let's say, ordinary crime, because is that organized, what criminologists call organized crime, is when there is corruption and violence. That because this corruption and violence are instrumental or functional to make sure that the crimes can continue. And that's what makes it really organized. That people they're using violence or affecting violence, so people don't have the courage to report a crime. Citizens, for example, or shop owners, or even the law enforcement authorities are afraid of the crime. That's in quite a few countries. That's the case. So they're so powerful and violent that people are afraid. So then it means they can continue their business. And then combine it with corruption. If they have corrupted, especially high-level people, then also they can continue their illegal business. So these are central elements: corruption and violence for organized crime. Now, if you look at the deforestation in Brazil, this is exactly what's happening. There's a lot of violence because I said most of this deforestation is illegal. We're talking about forests where many traditional communities are living, and they often resist this deforestation. The communities do not always know if it's legal or illegal. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they know it's illegal, especially in this territory, it's totally illegal, and so they resist. But then the loggers or the farmers, and they have gunmen, and they threaten this local resistance. So you have the violence, and the corruption is also very present because this deforestation goes hand in hand with illegal land registration. These farmers make sure that they register this land. So it's registered in a kind of auto-declaratory land registry system, which suggests that it's legal because it's somehow read, but it's not. And so there's a lot of fraud and corruption with the land registry system because, the Netherlands is a tiny country, and here you have a system, the cadastre system, and you can check for every square meter. It's known who is legally responsible for this square meter of land or water. But in a country like Brazil, which is 230 times larger than the Netherlands, and then over half of it in the Amazon biome, they don't have this perfect land registry system like the Netherlands. So a lot of land has not a definite status yet. And so land grabbers, as we call them, profit from this situation to illegally register land, and also in notary offices. And for example, in one state, Pará state, which is the leading deforestation state, kind of the size of Egypt, there's 3 times more land registered than there is land in reality. So
that does not add up. Yes.
There's systematic land fraud combined with corruption. So you find these elements of corruption and fraud and violence in the Amazon, and it's the most dangerous place to be an environmental defender. So you have really all the ingredients to call it organized crime.
Okay, so it's organized crime. You just told us that there are just a handful of people on the world who are looking into this. So what are the possible solutions? What are the alternatives to fight this crime?
Well, when I was leading 10 years ago, I was leading a research project, a criminological research project in Colombia and Brazil. And when I lived a few years in the Amazon, in Brazil, half of the year, and I thought a lot about this. What can we do? And I thought, I'm a criminologist. I'm supposed to have a smart answer, or smarter answer than a non-criminologist, about these forest crimes. And well, what I learned in the Amazon is if we want to save the Amazon, we have to work with communities, with the people who live in the forests, because most of them have an intrinsic interest in preserving the forest because they're dependent on the forest. So I thought we should do something with the communities. And strangely enough, that's not happening much. A lot of people talk, what can we do against deforestation? They talk with governments or with businesses, but the people living there are overlooked. And I thought, imagine you live in a forest, and the world wants to save the forest. You would appreciate that people would talk to you because you live there, you know it, and you have an interest. And strangely enough, this is not done systematically. So I thought, and that's what I started with. And then I thought we should try work with the communities. And because it's crime, we should use something knowledge and best practice of criminology. So, and then I thought we want to preserve the forest. And in my language, in criminological terms, that means you have to set up forest crime prevention practices. We have to prevent it. And that's situational crime prevention, as criminologists know. There's a lot of things you can do, and it's all geared towards making it harder to commit those crimes, to limit the crime opportunities. And so I started with the indigenous working together, and I thought, and one idea that I had was to use GPS cameras, because the authorities in Brazil, they have a satellite system, and the whole forest law enforcement system is satellite and GPS oriented. Of course, in the Amazon rainforest, there's no address. You cannot say, the crime occurred on this address. There's no addresses, but there's GPS locations. So the law enforcement system needs GPS locations. But who has GPS equipment? Almost no one, just a civil servant, but who has to cover a huge area. Mm-hmm. And so 10 years ago, I was thinking, what if the indigenous have GPS equipment, that they can record the exact location of the crime spots and give those data to the forest law enforcement authorities, so to make their work easier. So how can you connect the reality of the forest communities with the forest law enforcement system? So that's what I set up, really. And first as a pilot, and then I tested it out with indigenous communities.
And that's already working now? It's in place?
Yes, we started this in 2015 with one indigenous tribe, and with the first camera they had, they managed to stop 8 logging concessions in their indigenous territory, because they could prove it. Because the indigenous territories in Brazil have invisible GPS borders. It's really a kind of like a reserve, and outsiders are not allowed inside. You're only when the chief allows you to go inside. And so they have all the problems with illegal invasions. And now they can take pictures of people, and they have a patrolling team, or take pictures of trucks, logging trucks, all kind of equipment, and then give those pictures, GPS, geo-reference pictures, to the law enforcement authorities.
Now, this does raise a question which I already had in my mind when I listened to your describing this work and the fact that it's organized crime. Isn't this what you're doing then a dangerous job? And how dangerous is it for the local people?
That's very dangerous. The chief I just referred to, Chief Dada, he has been kidnapped. He survived murder attacks. But on the other hand, Brazil has a good justice system as well. So interestingly, he also managed, this chief, to get into the federal protection program. So he has personal police bodyguards who protect him. Mm-hmm. When he's in town, once a month he goes to town, and then he has this police protection. In his community, he has his indigenous bodyguards. So the chief is constantly guarded by several people, and this is not uncommon in the Brazilian Amazon. So that people are guarded all the time.
And how about yourself? Is it also a risk for you personally?
Well, I live in the Netherlands, so for me, it's not here. There's no danger. I don't think. No.
But I can imagine
when I go there,
when you
yes, I have to be. Yes, well, when I go there, I sometimes go with police escort to certain areas. and I keep very low profile. So you have to be smart, yes, because you have to be aware that, that it's not everybody appreciated. So I'm not Brazilian, although I have a working permit for Brazil. I can do there whatever I want, but I still consider it as a foreigner. And so, who are you? So yes, I have to be careful.
But how does it match up that on one hand you say, yeah, actually I need a low profile for the work I'm doing at the moment, and at the same time we're having this interview, and I've known you have done numerous interviews for magazines, for TVs. So how does that match?
Well, most of these interviews are for the Dutch television in the Netherlands. Yeah. And I do this because in the Netherlands people think, oh, this is, all these problems in Brazil, what do we have to do with it? Well, the Netherlands is one of the biggest investors in companies. A lot of Dutch pension funds, for the largest Dutch pension fund, heavily invest, for example, in companies that are strongly associated with deforestation, meaning beef and soy companies. And the Netherlands is also a big buyer. The Netherlands is the main destination of soy from Brazil. And this soy is not for the soy burgers, but this soy is cattle feed. Because the Netherlands has a very intensive cattle farming industry, lots of pigs and cows and chicken, and they eat soy from Brazil. So the Netherlands is also a big buyer from products that result from deforestation. So that's why I try to put this a bit on the agenda in the Netherlands.
Yes. So what you're telling me is that also, if you look at the whole value chain of why we're cutting down trees and who is benefiting from that, you can actually help saving trees by doing something in the Netherlands rather than doing it in Brazil or another rainforest.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And how can a consumer contribute to this situation if somebody wants to contribute? What can we do?
Well, the best thing really, especially with the Amazon, is to not eat meat, because the meat is really, like I said, the meat industry is driving deforestation in the Amazon. It's cattle and animal feed. So your choices as a consumer can make a difference. And then as an individual, the banks, there's no reports. There's also one report I contributed to. It's called Funding the Destruction of the Amazon and Cerrado. Cerrado is the savanna of Brazil. And then you can see the Dutch banks, Dutch pension funds invest heavily in these sectors. And a lot of people are underestimate this. And actually, since this report came out last year, there's a lot of professors, academics now that they're saying, hey, our pension fund is investing in the Amazon. It's like, it's like medical doctors in the Netherlands have discovered that their pension funds is investing in the weapons industry. And they're always say, hey, wait, we're trying to repair people. And then our pension fund goes to the weapon industry. We don't want this. It's the same with the universities in the Netherlands. They've just discovered, professors, that their pension funds invest in companies that are, cattle and soy in Brazil. So, so this is part of the awareness, I think, that these are the financial flows, and the Netherlands is a tradition. Well, since a few centuries, there's a lot of money here, and this money goes all over around the world, and yes, also to industries that are destructive for nature.
Okay, Tim, this is very specific for the Netherlands, so Dutch pension funds, Dutch industry, Dutch banks making investments. The brand called You has a global audience. Is there anything, do other people on this planet also have an opportunity to contribute?
Yeah, so for example, if you look at timber, like we talk about agriculture, but timber logging is always the first step, the first incursion into the rainforest. The logging roads open up the rainforest. And if you look at where all this illegal timber from around the world, not only because I was part of the Global Forest Expert Panel on illegal timber, and if you look at the global timber flows of illegal timber, they used to go to, in the 80s, most of it went to Japan. And then later on, most of it went to the US and to Europe. But especially the US and Europe, have become more stricter. So now the main two destinations of illegal timber have become China and India. because lots of construction going on, and especially this tropical hardwood is very practical, strong for construction. So I mean, these big economies, China and India also, the consumer awareness or more critical policies about sustainability could also be really helpful.
So Tim, thank you very much for sharing your insights on forest crime. And before we go, I'd like to ask you, where do you draw your inspiration from?
Well, part of my inspiration comes from nature and our beautiful planet. You know, I originally studied geography, and I think we live on this beautiful planet, and I really like nature and forest, and then especially tropical rainforest. I saw with this conservation of life, with more than all the species that we know, terrestrial species, you find them in tropical rainforest. So. And a lot of this destruction, and we're destroying a lot of these tropical rainforests, especially on the equator, the equatorial rainforests, which are the most biodiverse. And a lot of this is illegal. So I thought, okay, well, I want to help and to contribute that we stop this destruction and this illegal destruction. Okay.
Now you want to help stop it. And you just mentioned before that you're one of the very few people at the moment who are specialists in fighting forest crime. What do you? Is there anything you need which you can that people can contribute somehow?
Well, a few years ago, in 2014, I set up a pilot, which was 3 years, from 2014 to 17, in the Brazilian Amazon. I want to test, because I had this idea that GPS cameras are really helpful, because to register the exact location of illegal forest activities, which helps the forest law enforcement system. And the goal is not to put people in prison in Brazil, but the goal is to make it harder to commit forest crime. And so to limit the crime opportunities, as criminologists say. And so we, together with indigenous communities that patrol their indigenous areas against illegal invasions. And so this works really well. And we tested it out at several spots. And from that, we developed a best practice. And since 2 years, we made a foundation, because it's called Forest Forces Foundation. Forestforces.org is our organization. But we're relatively small. And for all of us, it's until now only voluntary work. All the money, we get donations from private individuals from all over the world. But it has not been many thousands for you. It just has been a few thousands euros per year. And that money we use extremely efficiently. All the money goes directly to the communities. So we have developed a best practice, and there's many new communities that want to join. And I'd want to scale up. I want to expand. I want to scale up both the monitoring in the areas where we are already working with the indigenous in Brazil, but also because I always wanted to develop something that you can roll out, that's cheap and efficient, and that they can do themselves autonomously. I wanted to set something up that external people like me are not necessary, because that was the idea, that they can do it. They can themselves, with the camera and the GPS evidence, go to the authorities, to the public prosecutor, who then can take action. So yes, I'd like to professionalize our foundation, to scale up, to not only expand in the Amazon, but also to other areas, because I think this model, and I discussed it something with people in national parks in Africa, for example, I think this model can be replicated easily in many other areas, also nature reserves, for example, because it's really just very helpful if authorities, forest authorities, know where the crimes are occurring, and communities, and making this connection between forest communities and trustworthy law enforcement actors. It is possible to make these connections, and that citizens and authorities can find joint solutions. Practice, but I'd like to scale it up. That's where I could use some help.
So people can find out more on forestforces.org if they find out what they can do and how they can contribute.
Yes, and they can always contact me as well via LinkedIn or via the website. Yes.
Okay. Hey Tim, these are great words to end. Thank you for again raising the awareness for the deforestation, protecting the tropical rainforest. A unique opportunity to view that from a criminologist angle. And I wish you the best of luck to get there. And yeah, thank you for your time sharing us. It's been an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. Thank you, Frits.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.